let's see how this goes. Let's see if this guy can turn into something. And I do think he has the upside, to potentially be a fringe sort of all-star level player.
Let's hit the top prospect in the Houston Astros organization. The name is Cam Smith. It's prospect profile time. Scott Braun with Baseball America's JJ Cooper and Geoff Pontes. Geoff, tell us about Cam Smith, acquired in the Kyle Tucker deal. And obviously, Astros fans have been looking for that next big star to attach themselves to and follow, hopefully to the big leagues, maybe even this year.
I think it's possible, probably less likely that he sees an extensive amount of time, depending upon what the injuries are, where he ends up shaking out defensively is all a big part of it. That being said, I think this is one of the first prospects the Astros have had in quite a long time that you could be really, really excited about. He was a slam dunk top 100 prospect, right inside of our top 50. The feedback that we got throughout the top 100 process kept getting better and better and better. Even the feedback that I was getting when I put together my Cubs list, when we put out those top 10s and he was inside that Cubs top 10, obviously he was still a Cub in the handbook, ends up, the trade happens after our deadline with Tucker moving to the Cubs. This was the big piece that the Astros asked for in that trade, more so than Paredes or Wesneski. It was Smith that they wanted. It was a player that they were on and just didn't have access to in the draft. Really, really good athlete. Somebody that over the last couple of years, since I saw him as a draft eligible sophomore after his freshman season on the Cape, throughout that summer working with Tino Martinez, took some massive steps forward in terms of the bats of ball ability, the hit tool, knowing what to swing at, getting into his power more consistently. And that continued to track upward as he went to FSU, and then obviously had one of the best debuts of anybody in that 2024 draft. Really, really good athlete. He hasn't necessarily translated to the defensive side of the ball, but moves well for his size. There's power output. The hit tool, like I said, has come along. He's always had pretty good swing decisions, doesn't chase a whole lot, keeps a pretty tidy zone. He's going to get on base. He can run a little bit. The big question, though, is does he end up at third base long term, which is his natural position? He has sort of the tools to maybe play a corner outfield spot, including the arm and enough foot speed to handle enough range in an outfield corner. Or he's big enough that and has sort of the offensive profile that maybe he moves to first base. Now, they committed some money to Christian Walker in a few years. It might be a few years away. That's not going to stop the Astros from potentially giving him looks at a variety of different positions. Not the same level of prospect, but we did see like a Joey Loperfido last year play it, or last couple of years play second base, play, some first base, play some center field, some other corner outfield spots. So I do think they'll focus on positional versatility with Smith, hoping that he sort of locks down a position.
I would say with that, we saw that, Dana Brown has said that they're going to look him at third base. They're going to look at him in right field. They're going to look him at first base. In the long term, generally when you hear something like that, that does not mean you can kind of look at the defensive spectrum and say he's probably not going to end up at the toughest of those positions. There are exceptions to that. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But if you told me that this means that Cam Smith's more likely to be an outfielder as an Astro, wouldn't shock me. And I think that there's going to be the opportunity there that they could use him in the outfield. I think third base, if he can pull off being a third baseman long-term, obviously say that's best for him and best for the Astros. But the key thing here, as Geoff mentioned, is the bat. And if the bat is as good as we think it could be, it's not really going to matter that much because he could be a very productive outfielder. Has the bat to kind of carry that. And I do think that, again, working on that versatility this year while he's still in the minors also does provide those multiple options. As Geoff mentioned, you got Christian Walker, but if there's an injury at first base, he could fit in as a plausible answer there. Let's see what third base looks like. Obviously, Bregman's gone. Isaac Paredes is there. Let's see by the time Cam Smith is ready, is third base a bigger need or is an outfield spot a bigger need? Where Astros do have a number of candidates, but they don't have Kyle Tucker anymore. So I think that really the Astros, what they're getting here is a really good bat. And thankfully for them, a guy with enough athleticism, enough versatility that he could be a viable option at multiple different positions, depending on what the team needs. But, Geoff, with that, as you mentioned, it's probably a late this year, late 25, but realistically probably 26. We're hoping to see him in Houston long term. There, we're going to know a lot more, I would say, by then about how this lineup kind of sets up.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna depend on sort of who ends up shaking out as the potential outfield there in Houston. With Tucker departing, there's been some talk about Jose Altuve moving to left field. Even after Alex Bregman signed in Boston, Altuve moving to left seems like it's a viable option, a place that he might see some run and some opportunities. I think he's keeping the seat warm, whether it's for a Jacob Melton, who is number 2 in this system, or Cam Smith if he moves there long term. I do think he has the tools. And I think it's sort of an interesting question as when Cam Smith moved in, how close was he to Melton? Melton was sort of the de facto one the last couple of years. He was the number 1 in the handbook. The trade happens. Smith moves ahead of him. For me, it wasn't much of a question. I just think when you look at Melton's a very good player. He hit, well when he was at Oregon State. The all around profile is very good there. But I think when you talk about offensive impact and tools, Smith has more power, has more field to hit, has sort of that athleticism, that bigger body. There's more maybe to come as well. That I think when you look at the overall player, and he was young. I mean, he's for a draft eligible sophomore, was just eligible for the draft. I think when you look at all those things, he's really the number 1 guy. Maybe him and Melton end up sort of fitting in with Myers or whoever it might be, in center field, or maybe Melton ends up in center field and they move Myers over to a corner. I think ultimately that's how this is all going to shake out. He has the offensive upside. He has the big power with the hit tool to match. And I think, if you're a Houston Astros fan, this is kind of exciting. Yeah, you lost Kyle Tucker. Yeah, you did lose Alex Bregman, 2 major cogs in that machine that won you multiple championships. But, downsizing a little bit to a young player with some upside that I think the Astros have also done a really good job of developing their internal players and making them better regardless of what their pedigree was. I think you have to sort of trust the process a little bit and say, all right, let's see how this goes. Let's see if this guy can turn into something. And I do think he has the upside, to potentially be a fringe sort of all-star level player.
All right. So to bring us to what's happening right now with the current club, JJ, the Astros, like Geoff mentioned, lose some of those superstars for a variety of reasons. It's very difficult to maintain the consistency that they've had for a very long time now. It's super impressive. When you look at the big league roster, as of now, as of when we're doing this, their outfield hitting wise looks like it's projected to be one of the worst in baseball. It could be their 7, 8, and 9 hitters, which you rarely ever see. Okay. So we're having this conversation. I start to think back to, the Verlander trade, right? When they deal away, who was it, Gilbert and Clifford? Maybe that doesn't necessarily matter. Just want to get your scope of where they're at as a farm system to be able to replenish enough to be playoff contenders every year and not have pain.
So I'll say this for them. They are understandably thinner on the farm system. They had penalties. They had draft penalties. They had international penalties for trash can gate or whatever you want to call it. They also did make trades. They've made multiple trades to try to fix up the big league club as they're making postseason runs. But Geoff, the thing that does jump out to me, I'm looking back on those trades. I can't really think of much of any of them that you look at and say, oh, they really would want to have that as a do-over, right? Like, okay, yes, they would help to have their outfield dealt to still have a Drew Gilbert, but it's not like Drew Gilbert has blossomed into one of the best prospects in baseball. He's kind of still, the question's still out on him very much. So kind of as you look at this, is there any of these trades that have happened with this over the last couple of years as you've been doing these Astros list that you look at and say, oh, man, they wish they could have that one over again?
No, I think they scout their system internally really, really well. That the guys that they moved away from, I think you could argue that it was a potential overpay by, moving a couple of prospects who were ascending at that point in time. I think Gilbert at the time of the trade was a top 100 prospect, but there were some whispers, internally that the team thought that Melton was better than Gilbert. I had people with the organization say that flat out to me, and you usually don't hear someone, speak that directly about their own players. I think when you look at Gilbert, he really hasn't progressed much from the guy that we saw at Tennessee. I don't know that he would necessarily be fighting for a job here. Maybe he'd fit in left field over Ben Gamble. That might be a slight upgrade. Clifford at this point, the jury is still out if he's going to make enough contact long term. So I don't know if those trades really hurt them, especially when you sort of consider Melton's still here, could come up, reinforce that outfield. Cam Smith, as we've talked about throughout this, could be developed as a corner outfielder. Certainly has bigger offensive upside than either Clifford or Gilbert or Melton for that matter. So I think the other thing you sort of have to say about the Astros is, we've had them as sort of a bottom tier farm system over the last 4 or 5 seasons, but they've consistently produced players that in the major leagues outperform what their pedigree was or what their prospect rank was. I think like Yainer Diaz, we were one of the earlier outlets on them, but generally I think the overall spectrum of outlets out there ranking prospects were a little slower to move on him. Jeremy Pena sort of came off of an injured year with a very small sample size and then jumped in and, was the World Series MVP. So I think you sort of factor all those things in. It's still a really good lineup, 1 through 7, 1 through 6. It's, probably as strong as just about any lineup in baseball, especially when you have Yordan Alvarez in the middle. And, I know Christian Walker doesn't necessarily get the fanfare that he deserves. This is one of the best home run hitters, one of the best power hitters in the game. And he's now going to be able, and he's a right-hander. He's going to be able to take advantage of those Crawford boxes. So I think when you look at the overall picture, they're still really strong offensively. They're still a really solid defensive team. And then you look at the pitching, they still have plenty of pitching that's under control for a couple of years. So they can still win this division. I still think they're going to compete. I'd love to see them make another move and try to reinforce that outfield, but maybe that comes internally.
Well, good. You did it. You made Astros fans feel better just now with all of that. So there you go, Astros fans. Much more coverage over at baseballamerica.com. Go get yourself a subscription. Subscribe to this YouTube channel for many more videos, including ones that cover each top prospect per organization being unveiled throughout spring training. We'll see you on the next one.